Hi and welcome to MZ Webinars. Thank you for joining us today. We are very pleased to have Anthony Horn and Will Cookson with us today on this webinar. Both of them are directors here at MZ, but from different sectors. So it's going to be really interesting to get their different perspectives on the regional skills planning. If you have any questions during the course of this webinar, please put them in the question box on the control panel. And we'll endeavour to get to those at the end of the presentation. If not, then we will contact you with your answers afterwards. Also, with a follow-up, you will be receiving the slides and also a recording of this webinar as a follow-up email. So please keep open your eyes for that as well. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to you, Anthony. Hi.
Hi, Debbie. Thanks for introducing today. I can see we've got a great mix of colleges and universities and providers and LEPs and combined authorities joining us on today's webinar, so we're really excited by that. We're going to be talking about how providers and LEPs can work together on regional skills planning, which is rather topical right now. And because of that, I'm very glad to be joined by our Director of Economic Development, Will Cookson. Hello there, Will. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. And yeah, thanks for the invitation. And yeah, looking forward to the webinar.
Excellent. So together, Will and I will cover a number of things on today's webinar, including a reminder of the impact that COVID has had and continues to have on labour markets right across the UK. How government policy context continues to evolve, our experience of working with skills advisory panels and how we've seen LEPs and providers working together via those forums, and then finally some thoughts on how we can best provide you as providers and LEPs and other organisations moving forwards. And just a quick heads up to begin with, we're going to run a quick poll in a few minutes where we'll ask you about the newly published skills white paper and whether that has made things more clear for you or not. So please do have that in the back of your mind as we run through the first few slides in the first section of today's webinar. So today, just before I kind of get onto those main agenda points, very quick introduction to MZ for any of you who aren't familiar with us. We are a global labour market data firm, headquartered in the US, but with operations in a number of countries around the globe, including here in the UK. Our mission is to provide comprehensive labour market and skills data to help you make more informed decisions that are going to help your business, and then ultimately are going to help individuals, educators, and employers all connect closely together and help you to lead on improving regional labour market outcomes. So speaking of the labour market, let's begin by reminding ourselves of the labour market context in which we're all operating right now and the unique ongoing impact that COVID-19 is having on labour markets right across the UK. So on screen here, what we see are the trends in employer recruitment activity across the devolved nations and regions of the UK throughout 2020, which, as we can see from the left-hand side of all of the charts, the year started off pretty normally this time last year, an uptick in employee recruitment activity into February. And then from the beginning of lockdown and the beginning of the COVID crisis from March 2020, what we see there is employer recruitment demand pretty much dropping off a cliff edge everywhere. So all regions, all devolved nations. We did then see an uptick in activity towards the end of 2020, as you can see on the right-hand side of all of the charts, as restrictions were eased and certain sections of the economy and labour market opened up for a period of time. However, the reintroduction of restrictions then brought ongoing issues to many regions and has continued into 2021, where we've seen another downturn in employee demand and employee recruitment activity in pretty much all regions and devolved nations, with the exception of a small number there. What we also saw towards the end of 2020 was this ongoing labour market disruption actually showing up as job losses. So redundancies, unfortunately, and on screen here, you see the percentage loss of jobs, again by devolved nation and region across the UK during Q3 of 2020 versus that same Q3 period in 2019. So essentially all nations and regions have seen more job losses at the back end of 2020 than we've seen in previous years. And indeed, you may have seen that reported yesterday coming through as now 1.7 million people unemployed to the end of November 2020, or an unemployment rate of 5%. So things not looking particularly positive there. And that's also worth reminding ourselves that those figures are happening at the same time as ongoing support packages for employment by the furlough scheme and various other bits and pieces of support. So that's the labour market context very briefly. And that, of course, sits alongside the policy environment, which is certainly moving right now. And it's, again, very fair to say, I think, that skills are very much on that policy radar right now, and they're very much in focus right now. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So we have the overarching plan for jobs, which we saw the Chancellor announce back in July of last year, and that incorporates a load of different initiatives and policy announcements that hang off the plan for jobs, so including additional job retention bonus and things like that. But more specifically, with skills in mind, we've seen the traineeship scheme, which has been around for some time. That was pushed again through the Skills for Jobs initiative. There was a renewed push on sector-based academies, which again, they had been around for some time, so some additional monies announced to support those. And then we saw the new Kickstart scheme emerge, which has had a few difficulties and a few back and forths in recent weeks. But a range of initiatives there and schemes, just three mentioned on screen, all intended, certainly in theory, to support the creation of jobs and to try and help connect skills in with that job creation process. So, for example, to try and connect pre-employment skills training in with a guaranteed interview, and trying to bring those kind of two worlds more closely together. And then if we bring ourselves right up to date, I'm sure we are all aware that last week saw the publication of the Department for Education's Skills White Paper. Now, what we're not going to do on today's session is talk through the White Paper in huge detail, page by page. We'll leave that to others. And there are various really important sections of the White Paper about things like supporting lifelong learning, or the lifetime skills guarantee, as it is referred to in the White Paper. There's a full section in its own right about supporting outstanding teaching. So really important stuff. But what we want to highlight today and focus on today are some of the sections most relevant to our topic, which is that of regional skills planning and delivery. So I have three slides that have pulled out direct quotes from the White Paper itself that are most relevant to what we're talking about here today. So firstly, we see throughout the White Paper the general theme of something we've heard a lot of before, that of ensuring provision is meeting the needs of local labour market needs. Again, we've heard that in a number of announcements over the past few years. And another thing we've heard, I think, mentioned a number of times is putting employers at the heart of the system. That goes back a number of years. In fact, I can't remember a time, I'm sure you can't either, when that wasn't a priority of government or some government department. That's in there again, as is a definite focus on increasing productivity, with explicit mentions of high-level technical qualifications and provision. Now, as well as those things not being anything massively new, I do think the general themes raise a few relevant questions, such as, do employers actually want to be at the heart of the skills system? What about lower level qualifications and related jobs? And how is all of this actually going to work in practice if these are things we've heard of over and over again. What's different with this white paper, and what's going to be different this time around? Well, there are a couple of new things mentioned in the white paper that sort of hint towards some of that. So we see these new local skills improvement plans mentioned, and the fact that these plans are going to be created by employers with providers, with a mention of an evidence-based assessment of skills needs. So some detail. And we also indeed see that an increased role for chambers of commerce is mentioned, and that may well be introduced in some trailblazer areas early in 2021, I think is the terminology used in the white paper. So there's a definite focus there on employer involvement, as well as the repeated mention of skill needs, and also an evidence-based approach to assessing those skill needs. So a little bit of detail in there. And then third and final slide about the white paper itself. There's a whole section about the funding of provision. And what comes out of that for me, again, is nothing really brand new, but more of a renewed mention of something else we've heard a lot of in the past, outcomes-based funding. So providers being funded based on employee demand, whatever that means, good labour market outcomes, whatever that means. We probably all agree that meaningful employment, which is another phrase mentioned in there, is a good labour market outcome. And then, interestingly, there's a clear suggestion in there, explicitly written down, about the encouraging of expansion of provision in certain areas, and indeed a scaling back of provision in other areas when we think of oversupply and undersupply. So, Will, just to kind of throw to you for a second there, there's obviously a lot of detail from the skills white paper that's yet to be determined about how all of this might work and what might be different. But I wonder if you can share any immediate feedback or even general mood music coming from your work with LEPs and combined authorities in terms of their initial response to the white paper.
Sure, Anthony. I kind of reached out to our customers, and we're working with across mayoral combined authorities and LEPs. We work with 2/3 of them, so we've got a broad base to go out to and to kind of take the temperature. I'll keep it brief. Obviously, different organisations have different takes on things. I think the key thing that came back was that there was a level of disappointment that the work that the skills advisory panels in particular have achieved over the last 2 years wasn't really reflected within the skills white paper. I'll come on in a minute to talk in more detail about skills advisory panels for those that aren't aware of them. But the frustration, I think, was that there wasn't an implicit reference to, or enough of an implicit reference to them. And then there's a tinkering with policy, potentially, insinuation anyway, that they're going to change policy slightly, bringing chambers of commerce into the mix. Many chambers of commerce are representative on skills advisory panels or representative within local enterprise partnerships. So generally that was the first bit of feedback I had, was disappointment in terms of the way that work had probably not fed its way into the skills white paper. And it's important to mention that skills advisory panels are funded by DFE. They are well established now, and obviously there's a group within DFE that essentially work directly with LEPs around that agenda. I think the second part, and it's worth mentioning this as well before we move on, is that they see that there's a huge opportunity here to continue to build on the progress that they've made, and I'll highlight some of that in these slides to come. So yeah, general feeling was disappointed, but up for the challenge of demonstrating their value as we go forward.
Really interesting. That's really interesting, Will. Thanks. And I think, yeah, similar from the FE world, and I'm sure from the HE world as well. The devil's going to be in the detail of what comes out of the white paper, and you know what if any changes there are actually going to be at any scale. So we'll watch with a keen eye to see some of those. So
it's interesting, isn't it? Just one more thing, and it just occurred to me is there's a real urgency from, I think, the operational side of these policy, the direction of policy. There's a real urgency because obviously the things that you've mentioned in your previous slides in regards to obviously the impact and exposure to the negative impact of COVID-19, higher unemployment. So it's all to play for is generally the feedback I was getting.
Yeah, definitely. And you've mentioned their skills advisory panels already actively operating in this space. So in that context of the ongoing labour market disruption, the evolving policy environment, can you kind of tell us a little more about skills advisory panels and the work that you've been observing happening?
Sure, yeah. So if we go on to the next slide, introduced in 2018, it was October from memory. Big announcement, but essentially trying to address a time-old issue that many of our attendees will be aware of, which is that balance between skill supply and employer demand, and wanting to better match that to employers' needs. DFE led on the policy initiative, as I mentioned previously, and obviously they have provided funding to support this, and we'll be entering the third year of funding, and that funding is obviously going to local enterprise partnerships and mayoral combined policies to establish skills advisory panels, which are all established now. Next slide, please. So essentially they were established to help LEPs in the broadest sense, including mayoral combined authorities and Greater London Authority, to fulfil their requirement to understand current future skills needs. This was obviously running in parallel with the push on the industrial strategy and the localization of the industrial strategy. SAPs are essentially partnerships that include a mixture of public and private sector employers, local authorities, colleges, universities, and Job Centre Plus as well. Independent training providers as well. So it's a varied makeup. Often there'll be a dotted line through to a specific employer group that the LEP also has, or an employer board that the LEP holds responsibility for. Essentially, it's important we're remembering the bigger context here. LEPs and mayoral combined authorities are responsible for decisions on large amounts of public money being spent. And so obviously being able to understand current and future skills needs at a geographically local area is really important to them. So they're well placed to lead on, they are well placed to lead on that work. Next slide, please. 36 SAPs are established. They'll all receive a third round of funding, as I've mentioned. Lots of work in progress and lots of reporting and work's been achieved. SAPs have been very effective, and I'll talk a bit more about this as we get into specific examples, but very effective in terms of getting data and insight in regards to employer demand around skills across a LEP geography out to the provider base. It's also important to mention, and the white paper mentions this as well, there is a skills and productivity board, and that's been established to provide the government with expert advice around skills and vocational qualifications. Next slide, please. So I want to move on to talk about our experience of working with further education colleges and local enterprise partnerships around skills advisory panels, and our experience of seeing that happen. Next slide, please. We're really fortunate to be a member of the Cheshire and Warrington Local Enterprise Partnerships Skills Advisory Panel. We attend their monthly meetings, and we also, through providing access to our tools, work with a wide range of organisations, which you can see there on the left-hand side wide range of colleges, independent training providers, and obviously the LEP themselves and Job Centre Plus. I think it's we're obviously close to that particular skills advisory panel, but I do think it particularly draws out some strong examples of good practice. They have been able to really been effective in terms of influencing the design of local curriculum, as well as informing some of the operational activity of Job Centre Plus. The LEP themselves have a local growth fund, a skills fund, and that's been informed by the labour market intelligence that's been produced by that group. And obviously MZ is one contribution to that local market intelligence, but there are other sources and other work that's been brought in. If we go on to, I mean, it's a good example there is that obviously through the work of the SAP, they've been able to lay the foundations for a strong Institute of Technology, and that will deliver higher level technical skills, which again links back to one of those priorities that comes out within the white paper. Next slide, please. Thought it'd be useful just to give an idea of the type of reporting that was produced or is being produced by the Cheshire and Warrington LEP through their work on the Skills Advisory Panel. And all of these reports are going out to the FE partners, the universities. And it's important to mention as well that those FE partners have, during the first year of the Skills Advisory Panel, were provided with access to MZ tools, and they've gone on to work directly with us as we've gone into year 2. But yeah, a whole range of different focuses in terms of reporting, everything from deep dives into digital skills, obviously looking at the COVID-19 crisis, employer demand for labour and skills, particular focus on young people and also on adult workforce and skills delivery, and labour and learning market assessment. And essentially, it's important to mention this isn't reporting that was decided by the LEP. This is decided in consultation with a wide range of partners and through the Skills Advisory Panel. So they try and find out what information is important to the provider base and other stakeholders, and then work that up and present that back to them. And I think that's the underpinning good practice in terms of reporting. These reports, if you want to look at them, are available on the LEP website, Cheshire and Warrington LEP's website. Next slide, please.
I think,
so,
yeah, I think before we kind of move on to almost looking to the future, first of all, kind of thinking about providers and then kind of looping back to LEPs and SAPs, I think we're going to run a quick poll at this point.
Exciting.
Yes, and just to kind of get your kind of take as attendees on, hearing about, and I'm sure you've read bits of the white paper and other policy, and looking at the kind of work that you guys do on an individual basis. It would be good just to get a sort of finger on the pulse of what you think the environment looks like given the publication of that paper. So I think Debbie is going to help us out here by publishing the poll.
Hopefully you can see that. Can you see that?
We can, Debbie.
Right. How long are you going to give these guys?
Oh, it's a race to the finish line. We'll give them another 10 seconds to answer, and we'll see what comes out of that.
Okay, I think we can close it now. And there's your results.
Okay, so just to recap there, 38% yes, 6% no, and 56% don't know. And I think that's quite telling, the don't know, because my take on that, and obviously these things are always open to interpretation, is that it's all to be revealed. I think there's a lot within that white paper, and we've alluded to that obviously there's trailblazer areas, but there's a lot of work that will still need to be done around those policy initiatives. And therefore, I'd imagine some people are hesitant, or they haven't read the white paper in full yet, which obviously may be something we need to take into account.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definite. What comes next? What's the detail behind all of this? I think is is going to be really important. So that's really fascinating. Thanks for taking part in that quick poll there. It's really appreciated. So jumping back into the slides then. So I'm now going to talk about the future, not massively into the future. I'm thinking more the coming weeks and months. What do we at MZ think providers should be doing and focusing on when it comes to this question of regional skills planning? Well, I think the good news is that our FE strategy at MZ is all about helping providers to use jobs and skills data so that they can lead local labour markets and communities, and that can help. That can include things like helping you to articulate your impact, your intent, to use Ofsted language, to make sure that work you do to align your curriculum with labour market need is done comprehensively, and also to help you deliver employability insights to your students, whatever age they are and whatever stage they're at in terms of their labour market progression. Now, we heard and saw in a slide earlier that the skills white paper itself has a definite focus on higher level technical skills, and it also repeatedly mentions increasing productivity. Now, I don't think any of us would disagree with that. We wouldn't disagree that increasing productivity and helping encourage higher level, higher paid jobs, we wouldn't think that's a bad thing. But for the FE sector in particular, I think it's always been the case that the sector has focused on all skills, all jobs in the labour market, and I would suggest that that's vitally important now more than ever. And I'll just share a quick example with you as to why I think that's important. So here we're going to look at the skills most in demand from employers through the second half of 2020 across the Southeast LEP region of England for two different types of jobs, different sets of jobs. So firstly, if we look at jobs that are grouped together under the definition of managerial and professional jobs. So they're right across different sectors, but those jobs that are typically paid the most and which typically require those higher level skills that the white paper is mentioning repeatedly. Here we can see the 10 skills that were most in demand across that 6-month period for those jobs. If we then consider a very different set of jobs, so those jobs grouped together as defined by customer service, process and elementary job definitions, so those jobs that are typically the least well paid in the labour market, but which employ high volumes in all regions, we can see a very different set of skills being demanded by employers of those jobs in that same 6-month period. So my point here is regional skills planning can really only be done effectively and comprehensively if the entire labour market, so all jobs, all skills, all employers indeed, are considered in their entirety. And I would certainly suggest that FE providers are extremely well placed to be part of the solution to dealing right across the labour market in that way. Well, how to do that? Well, the good news is, again, MZ are here to help. That's why we exist. So what you see on screen now are the key workflows in our FE Analyst software tool, a tool which is going to give you direct access to labour market and skills data at a very detailed level, right down into your region and locality. I'm just going to quickly highlight a couple of areas of FE Analyst that are particularly useful when we're thinking about regional skills planning. So the first of those being the curriculum overview report within the tool. So this report takes your curriculum plan and shows you how your learner numbers stack up against related jobs in your area. So are there potential areas of oversupply or undersupply, things that are explicitly mentioned in that white paper as we saw earlier on. Now, I'm talking here from a provider point of view, but I know that LEPs and combined authorities and the skills advisory panels themselves are also using this section of the tool Is there anything you wanted to add on that from their perspective?
No, I think they found it to be very valuable, but the view is slightly different. Rather than looking at particular institutions or on an institution by institution basis, they tend to look at it and analyse it, as you'd imagine, across a LEP geography and across in aggregate across delivery across the whole patch, and then try and see the mix and balance, whether there's undersupply or oversupply. So yes, the curriculum overview tool is a key part of the reason that local enterprise partnerships are using our analyst tool and continue to. Yeah.
Thanks, Will. The other section of FE Analyst, which is particularly relevant to what we're talking about today, so regional skills planning, is the course design report. So that's all about understanding skills needs, so digging below jobs down to skill level. What are the needs of employers in your region? And again, we saw how important that was earlier with that example I showed from the Southeast LEP region in England through the second half of 2020, sort of fully understand the detail of where jobs are and what specific skill needs there are for those different jobs. So if I give you a quick example of that and how it's going to help you to look at the demand for skills, I could search for a particular skill within the course design report. So here I've gone for Java, a programming language. What FE Analyst is going to then do is tell me how many jobs there are in your region that require that skill, how those jobs are trending, how much people are being paid in those jobs. We can then see which other harder technical skills are needed for those jobs. So as well as Java, what are the other technical skills that are needed in those jobs? And perhaps equally importantly, for those same jobs, what are the human cross-cutting skills that employers in your region are demanding? And indeed, who are those employers? So who are the employers in your region that are employing those jobs that require Java and other technical skills right now? So if you aren't using FE Analyst and you are a provider, let's have a conversation about that. Both providers and LEPs can get their hands directly on that labour market and skills data, which we think is going to be extremely useful in the current climate. And we'd love to have a conversation with you all if you're not already using that data about how we can make it happen for you. But at this point, I'm going to throw back to you, Will, for your kind of thoughts on what else LEPs can be focusing on right now.
Sure. Next slide, please. So beyond the skills white paper, some of this has come directly from conversations with skills leads at local enterprise partnerships. I think there's a real need to champion the work that's been done, good practice, and I alluded to some of that. Obviously, that's just a couple of examples, and there's many more that could have been included. But I think the need to build on progress that's been made to date in terms of obviously the practical side of bringing that group of stakeholders and providers together around a particular evidence base. I think continuing to share local data, labour market insights with partners. We know that we're in for more disruption this year, and we know that there's very much a determination to focus in on how best to support people that have been made unemployed, young people which are overrepresented in terms of the disruption that's taken place as part of the pandemic, and then more broadly focusing in on recovery. So yeah, I think continuing to do and champion and shout about what it is that they are doing is really important, and continuing to be a conduit for stakeholders to meet. And obviously we would say this, but it's worth mentioning again how important a common language around skills and around understanding the local economy, how important that is for getting everyone on the same page in terms of corralling around particular issues that need to be addressed. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Will. I think
we're on the summary. Yeah. Wow.
No, indeed, you've you've brought those thoughts together really neatly there, and I would definitely agree with everything you've said on that. So I'm going to close things out then. So to round out today's webinar, in summary, we all know that the UK labour market continues to experience significant upheaval and disruption, both overall, but definitely at a local and regional level. The skills white paper is here. It's arrived at last. It leaves a lot of questions and details unanswered at this stage, but I think it's a really clear call to action for organisations to lead on regional skills planning. Providers and LEPs are already doing great work in that space, as we've touched on, so I think they are better placed than anyone to push forward on that. As we've seen, when it comes to labour market and skills data, the devil is often in the detail, and so we do unashamedly encourage both providers and LEPs and others to get direct access to that data, because that's really the only way to support effective partnerships for regional skills planning, and it's going to ensure that all bases are covered, all jobs, all skills, all employers across labour markets. And we at MZ are here. We have the data and the tools to help you with that. And on that very point, to help you in the immediate term, we have free regional reports available to help kickstart your thinking and planning of using this data. So available at either a LEP or a local authority level. You can see what's gone on through 2020 and thinking forward which jobs and industries are most exposed in your locality and how that might influence and help your thinking. So you'll receive the link to request that report if you haven't already done so, and I know many of you already have, when we send out the recording and the follow-up to this webinar. There's also the option to purchase a more detailed local summary report, so where we can dig much more into the detail of that data to help tell you things like which jobs are most at risk in your region at a very detailed job level, how many people are employed in those jobs, etc., etc. And as we've touched on, myself and Will earlier in the slide, subscribing to our analyst software tool is going to give you that direct and ongoing access moving forward, and we can get you up and running on that within 24 hours if you'd like to. Couple of dates for your diary. So a little way out towards the end of February, we have a UK-wide MZ webinar where we're going to look at the most recent lockdown and the impacts of that on the labour market. And then for those of you in LEPs and combined authorities and the economic development space, we have a webinar in a couple of weeks running. The great news is that despite the slide there, it won't be me on that. It will actually be Will, which I'm sure you're all pleased to hear. And Will's going to be talking there about a practical application of some of the data we've talked about earlier on, and how our analyst tools for LEPs and economic development clients can really help you with that. Those of you who are from the world of FE and HE and other providers, do keep an eye on our webinar page and social media, because of course we'll be running more sessions as more detail continues to emerge from the white paper, as well as other challenges that the sector will be grappling with going forward. So hope you can join us for at least one of those. Please do feel free to reach out to us directly, and we'd love to have a conversation with you about any questions you have and how we can help you on that. I think it just falls to me to say thanks to you all for joining. Thanks Will and Debbie for helping to run the webinar and deliver the webinar. And we thank you for joining today's MZ webinar, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Anthony. You take care.